You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
So here in the Seattle Real Estate Podcast, we talk a lot about the fact that rents are going up, there's no affordable housing, there's no affordable rental properties. What do we do? And oftentimes you'll hear, oh, we need rent control. We need rent control. But then we don't really look and take a good look-see on the dynamics of that and what happens when rent control is put in place. Well, we've got a perfect example of that right here. St. Paul Rent Control Initiative backfires. Uh-oh. What happened? Well, it unleashes chaos in the housing market. Since we're reasonable here in the Seattle Real Estate Podcast, we don't believe it's chaos, but it's definitely going to rock the market. I mean, you've got a market that's like, all right, here's your business proposal. Here's your concept. Here's you getting financing. Oh, wait a minute. We're going to take a hard left turn here. That whole income stream that you were counting on as an investor building these 2,000 apartment units, yeah, put that on hold because we're going to cap you out at 3% rent increase a year, tops. What do you think those investors are going to do? Are they going to go, oh, okay, well, we're still going to go ahead with that and we're just going to keep doing the same thing? No, they're going to make adjustments. That's what we've got going on in St. Paul. Got a little adjustment period. Is it chaos? Let's find out. Let's jump on in. Let's see what's going on in St. Paul. And I know this is a Seattle Real Estate Podcast, but we don't have any real rent control here in Seattle we can talk about. So we got to go elsewhere. We got to start looking. We got to do the dive and come up with info and see what's happening. Before we do, if you're new here, welcome. My name is Sean Reynolds. I own a couple of real estate companies and I read news stories from that perspective. Simple as that. All right. Enough of the chit chat. Let's go. Democratic leaders in Minnesota's capital city are scrambling for solutions after developers put several large projects on hold. All right. That's the chaos. Several large projects on hold. That's that whole tapping of the brakes. We're not going full tilt. We're just we got to put a hold on this, figure out what we're doing. They got to make some adjustments. So projects on hold across St. Paul in the wake of last week's election when residents approved what may be the strictest rent control policy in the country. That's why when I was sent this by one of the great viewers / listeners of the podcast, I was like, all right, St. Paul, I haven't done much there, very little. Let's take a run at this because this is an interesting story. This is one of those stories where you're like, okay, if that happened in my town, what would the dealio be? Here it is. The rent control ballot initiative in St. Paul was overshadowed nationally by an effort in neighboring Minneapolis to disband the city's police force. Now, I did covered that. What a terrible idea. But, you sometimes got to put your toe in the water and test things out and just kind of find out how that goes. We did that here in Seattle, a little defunding of the police, and it looks like we're coming out of that. And we're gonna probably add some more police to our police department here in Seattle when we're all said and done. We're not quite out of the woods yet there, but Minneapolis, yeah, they've got some issues going on. But while the Minneapolis police initiative went down in flames, the residents basically said, no. Left-wing activists on the eastern bank of the Mississippi River succeeded in their effort to cap rent increases at 3% annually, including on new construction, a step most communities have imposed rent control policies have specifically avoided out of concern that it would discourage future investments. Really? It would discourage. Yeah, I don't think we're going to be involved in that project quite so much. Our equities position has gone from we're fully on board to how can we extricate ourselves from this project? Can't really blame these developers because you set up your pro forma based on one thing, and then all of a sudden, all right, the most you're going to get is 3%. That doesn't even keep up with inflation half the time, right? When you're all said and done with things. Taxes, all that good stuff, 3% annually. All right, you still want to build that bad boy? Oh, I don't know. We're going to have to reimagine and rethink this investment. Does that sound familiar? It should. The St. Paul initiative passed last week with 53% support. So not overwhelmingly, but it did pass. Opponents of St. Paul's rent control initiative warned before the vote the developers and financial investors would pull the plug on projects if the ballot measure were to pass. And by pull the plug, what they mean is in their current state, they're going to have to rework the numbers and kind of reconsider. It's not like you've got these projects that are, in the works and all of a sudden they're just not going to be built out. They're going to be built out somehow. Somebody's going to do something somewhere. Maybe they become units for sale. You've got considerations like that. Maybe the whole rental, you build all these rental units. Maybe that isn't where they go with that. We don't really know. What does it look like? And that appears to be exactly what's transpired over the past week, pulling the plug on these projects. Large developers who spoke to the Minneapolis Star Tribune and the St. Paul Pioneer Press told reporters that they're pausing their projects across the city and they are reevaluating. All right, there we go. Reevaluating, reimagining, rethinking what, if any, future business they'll be doing in St. Paul. Dramatic, yes. But what we're saying here is that they got to figure out a different game plan. Does it work at 3%? All right, let's keep going. If it doesn't work, what does work? And these are all guesses. Nobody has a crystal ball for what's going to happen. Are the tenants going to come to this project? Are the buyers going to come if they decide to convert them to units that they can sell? Is there enough business demand in the area to have businesses come into the retail on the first level? All those things are massive considerations that when you say, well, let's just throw some rent control in there and we'll get some cheap rents. All right. You are rocking the market when you do that. You're rocking the market. And this is what happens. Got a little tappy tap on the brakes there. Attempts by National Review to reach those developers for comment were unsuccessful. They're too busy trying to figure out what they're going to do with 3% rent control. All right. So B. Kyle, president and CEO of the St. Paul Area Chamber of Commerce, said her organization is in the process of cataloging all of the projects killed or put on hold. Killed. That is a strong word. They're not dead. They're not dead. They're maimed. They got winged. You're out duck hunting and you shot a duck in the wing and it came down, but it's not dead. You winged it, right? Or put on hold because of the measure. It's not just new development projects at risk, she said. Kyle said she's already been told of dozens of buildings that have 2022 rehabilitation projects stopped. She said there's now chaos across St. Paul because of the rent control measure. All right, so you're just in a time period where you got to figure it out. And by figure it out, make some pretty good size adjustments. Yeah, that original game plan, not so much. Let's have a meeting. We said this would happen. This should be no surprise, Kyle said, noting that opponents of the initiative were accused of being, they're accused of pushing a disaster narrative. Okay. Well, chaos in these markets, that's kind of like disaster. It's going to be a disaster for a while until these developers can figure it out. Here's the thing. Developers always figure it out. It might just not be right now, today, but they work off of a profit motive, which I know a lot of people in Seattle, those socialists, don't want to hear about, but profit tends to drive things in a way that makes everything clear. Greed is good. Who said that? Let me know in the comments. If you don't like Wall Street, I just gave it away. Damn it. If you don't like Wall Street, Wall Street. Wall Street 1, one of the greatest movies of all time. We said this would happen. This should be no surprise. Got the disaster narrative that's now reality. The truth is, we're seeing it. This isn't about emotion, she said. This is about how does a deal get financed? How does a project cash flow? Can you make a fair profit on a deal? Those are the questions that these developers are asking themselves and their investors and their folks. All right, can we still make a go on this? What does this look like? And if it's a yes, then it moves forward. More than likely, it's going to be altered. Do they have to go back to the drawing board? Maybe on some of this stuff. It depends how the deal was set up, right? Depends what the initial concept was for a project. What does that look like? What does the zoning allow? What can we do here? Those are all questions. I'm not much of a commercial guy, but I've done a lot of single family and a lot of smaller, not commercial, but kind of quasi type stuff. All of the underlining stuff is basically the same. Does this make sense? Will this cash flow when we're all said and done? Because if it doesn't, drawing board. Maybe we flip this thing to somebody else who has a different business plan. That happens all the time. You'll see a project sit there forever and ever and ever, nothing happening. And then all of a sudden you read about it and, oh, somebody picked that up. And then next thing you know, it's being built out. Somebody else got a hold of it that, is making something go. Developers will do deals where it makes sense for them to do deals. I'm going to read that one again. Developers will do deals where it makes sense for them to do deals. Talking my language there, right? It doesn't make sense. Is it reasonable? Well, a 3% rental cap, what we're saying is no, possibly no. Maybe it does. I don't know. I don't know what's in their business model and their business plans, what their end goals are. But 3% cap, what kind of incentives are we going to give to build stuff within this environment? What are we going to do there? Don't really know, right? Lots of questions, not many answers. Our goal in St. Paul is to make this as inviting an environment as possible. So investors, want to bring their projects here, all right? Because St. Paul desperately needs more housing across the entire spectrum. So there you go. There's one consideration. Stuff in the pipeline, well, you're gonna cut off that stuff from coming in through the pipeline the way that it was intended. And who knows, maybe some of this stuff will go through anyway. It's unknown. But there's at least going to be a big pause on it. And so these folks who are like, we need more housing now. Well, you just did a rent control initiative. And so, yeah, the opposite is going to happen. You're going to bring fewer projects to the market. Nicely done. Job well done. That is just what happens. That's just what happens. Proponents of the rent control initiative said that it was desperately needed to offer predictability to both tenants and landlords. Landlords don't need predictability like that where you are capping what they can do with their asset class, right? And so offer predictability to both tenants and landlords and to advance racial justice in the city. There you go. All right, so you've got business model with racial justice. You're trying to balance the two. That's going to be a tricky one. St. Paul would lead the nation in rewriting the outdated and unfair rules that give landlords unlimited power to economically exploit their tenants, one rent control supporter wrote in the online Minnesota Post. If you're viewing landlords as economically exploiting their tenants, all right, tenants have a right to go elsewhere, don't they? I mean, you can up and move. You can go to a community that's cheaper. You can go somewhere else that's cheaper. That is their right as well. Those are some of the flip side arguments that I often bring up, and people are like, yeah, but that's just not fair. Life isn't fair, folks. Yeah. Proponents acknowledge that annual rent increases in the Twin Cities have averaged less than 3% over the past 2 decades. But BIPOC renters, and that's Black, Indigenous, people of color renters, are the most likely to experience egregious rent spikes well above 3%. They dismissed warnings that rent control would imperil new developments and de-incentivize property owners from improving the quality of their buildings, uncontroversial opinions among the vast majority of economists. So the issue with BIPOC renters are most likely to experience egregious rent spikes well above 3%. Oftentimes, they're in the lowest of the socioeconomic areas of rental housing, and those oftentimes can be below market. And so when they get moved up to market, you might have a well above 3% rental increase. That's just me looking at these markets over the years and going, but yeah, you had more than a 3% spike in rent there, but you're still barely at the average for the greater area here. So you got to kind of keep that in perspective, right? So they dismissed warnings that rent control would imperil new developments and disincentivize property owners from improving the quality of their buildings. Uncontroversial opinions among the vast majority of economists. All right, that's going to happen. That's going to happen. If you're only getting XYZ bump in rent, are you going to put more money back into your building? No, I don't think so. They argue that the developers are bluffing about pulling the plug on projects. Okay, well, we'll see how that goes. And all they're really trying to do is scare residents and city leaders in order to change the ordinance. You know what I find interesting about this is when it comes to real estate and somebody gives you like the real deal and people don't believe you. And then when it happens, it's just like, silence from the peanut gallery. Oh yeah. How did they know this was going to happen? How did they know developers were going to pull the plug on these things? We thought they were just going to keep going. I mean, we assumed they're just going to keep going. I don't get it. Weird, right? But Kyle said the concern about the future of those projects is very real. Of course it is. Hey, we're not really sure if these things will pencil. Even nonprofit and senior housing developers fear their financial models won't work under the new policy. Really? Yeah. I mean, you got to reimagine the whole thing, right? You're going along, you're booking along at 55 because you're a law-abiding citizen, maybe 70 in the open road somewhere. And all of a sudden, 3% cap. That's going to monkey the process up a little bit, isn't it? It's not about greed or good people versus bad landlords, Kyle said. It's about math, return on your equity. These are very basic concepts. But folks that are proposing rent control, oftentimes they don't really get that. That's the bottom line. They don't understand because ultimately they already own nothing. And they're happy. Have you heard that before? Investors naturally are inclined to pump money into communities where they have a better opportunity to make a return and into communities that offer them more flexibility. That's interesting, isn't it? Wow. Who would have thought that? New construction will not go where it is harder to do business. Rent control will stop new investment that comes in from outside this market. These are basic business principles, folks. I mean, this is macro econ 101. This is like in your first 10 pages of the syllabus, right? All right. When you've got a situation where a lot of people are making money, competition comes in and now there's less competition. I mean, if you're making money, people are going to keep doing it. If you're not making money, people are going to stop. Noting that a recent Minnesota Housing Task Force report found that the state already is well off the pace of building the 300,000 new homes that will be needed by 2030. And this is happening all across the United States. Haven't had enough housing built. And that's why the affordable housing is such a big issue right now. A lot of people just can't afford this stuff. But putting a rent control in, it's going to monkey the market. Period. It is. You're going to have to work your way through it and get there. St. Paul needs to elevate its image to continue attracting investors, Kyle said, and this does not help. All right, the people proposing the rent control, they don't care. They just think that buildings pop up anyway. They don't see the back end, which is kind of where my perspective comes from as an appraiser. All right, does this pencil? I'm a hired gun by banks and investors to tell them, as a disinterested third party, Does this make sense? If it doesn't make sense, they don't do it. The investor doesn't do it. Maybe the builder still moves forward because he's got a different opinion and he's going to use his own cash and maybe he doesn't finance it. And this is on a very, very small residential scale I'm talking about. These big projects, I mean, you've got layers of investors. You've got all kinds of intricate stuff. But the bottom line is, does it make sense? And when you're going along and midstream, you change that up. This does not help is the quote that we can go to. We in St. Paul do not have the luxury of being cavalier about our housing market, she said. We need to be as earnest and inviting and participatory as possible. This rent control does not help that market. In addition to curbing the development of new homes, Kyle noted, the rent control initiative also threatens the stock of existing rental homes and the quality of those homes. St. Paul property owners are already facing a 7% property tax increase next year. Add in 6.2% inflation, a 31-year high employee wages increases, and add in 6.2% inflation, which they're pointing out is a 31-year high. Interesting. Employee wage increases and a 3% cap on rent increases, and there are plenty of incentives for owners to sell their single-family rentals and to convert their apartments into condominiums so that they can sell them. Make some money. That's what you do. And then people complain, how come we don't have enough affordable rental units? I don't get it. Maybe look at your policy. That's happened in other cities, and it could happen in St. Paul too, said Joe Hughes, a local businessman who owns about 20 small apartment buildings in the city. When these houses that are rented sell, that's going to be a net loss for the BIPOC community. That's a lot of what I've talked about, is the policy that is being set up to try and protect the BIPOC community has the exact opposite effect and actually negatively impacts them oftentimes. I think there will be a higher percentage of white people buying them than there are living in them now. Hughes is critical of another aspect of the rent control initiative that he says threatens his business. Hughes said that he and most of his friends in the rental property business typically try not to impose significant rent increases on their tenants. I think most reasonable landlords do that. If you've got a good tenant in there, you don't want to just crush them with a huge rent increase. You do it slowly over time if the market warrants. Because guess what? As the owner of that property, your expenses don't stay the same. Those go up as well. El Norte, they're not going south, right? The vast majority of rent increases that we did are $10, $15, $20 a month increases, he said. But the ones that you see in the media, I bumped my rent $600. And that's just what you see. If it bleeds, it leads. But I think most rent increases, and after reading rent roll records for, 30-something years as an appraiser, all right, how much rent are they getting? Okay, there's the bump between that year and that year and that year. A lot of times landlords don't increase the rent because they've got a good tenant in there, and it's worth it for them to keep that tenant in there because it's a makes sense for everybody. And maybe you're getting way below market rent, but you've got a good tenant in there that takes care of the house. That's worth thousands of dollars a year. So there's two sides to every story. As a result, after several years, some tenants end up with monthly rents that are well under market value. There you go. Typically, he said, owners would bring the units up to market when the tenants moved out, but that's not allowed under the new rent control policy. The 3% limit applies even when turning over a rental home to a new tenant. Proponents of the measure said that was necessary to disincentivize landlords from giving up tenants the boot simply as so they could jack up the rents. Hughes said it will instead force landlords to adhere their business models, potentially passing on larger increases than they normally would to all their tenants across the board. You're going to have to spread it out. I think in the next couple of years, we're going to have higher rent increases than we had the last few years, he said. And there's where the communities on the lower end of this market get impacted. Everybody gets a rent increase. Not special. Property owners who don't sell their rental units also will have little incentive to improve their properties beyond keeping them up to code. And small investors looking to buy and refurbish older buildings may think twice if there is no guarantee they can charge a high enough rent to make the math work. You're messing with the free market. And when you do that, you're going to have to be prepared to suffer the consequences. And that means things may not work out as expected as a result of a rent cap like this. The ballot language does not direct the city to create a process for landlords to file for an exemption to the 3% increase limit to allow for a reasonable return on an investment. But Hughes said, we don't know anything about what that's going to look like. It just doesn't sound good if you're a real estate investor. Are you looking forward to this? Probably not. No, I don't think so. If you're looking to buy a building that needs improvement, are we going to know what we're going to be able to charge before we buy it? What we're going to be able to charge for rents after the renovations, he said. A lot of these old buildings, they need a lot of work. And you have rent caps, they just become slumlords, right? I mean, that's kind of how this goes. Hughes said it's been super frustrating because many proponents of the rent control initiative don't understand his business. It seems like we just talked about that. They don't own anything. They don't understand how this works. They've never gone to the bank for a loan, nor do they really care. And they often come to the debate thinking that property owners and other opponents of the rent control initiative had bad motives. And by bad motives, they mean trying to stay in business, which dictates that they turn a profit. Bad, horrible. Can't have that. We thought the people voted for it were well-intentioned and were trying to do the right thing, whereas they looked at us as just being non-compassionate, greedy people. That's how most people look at real estate people. You guys are greedy bastards. Well, no, but this is how this works, folks. Oh, and they still don't get it, right? That was a frustrating debate to have, Hughes said. To think that they're at a different level morally and ethically and stuff like that is just ridiculous. I agree. You're on two different levels. And if those folks, they should have to go through the process of trying to figure out how to economically make a project viable. Before you propose something like this, that's what they should have to do. All right, we need you to get your proposal accepted by one bank for this one parcel right here. Good luck there. This isn't working out. Shocking. In response to the news that developers are pausing projects and that lenders are pulling their money, St. Paul Mayor Melvin Carter has urged the city council to work with him to exempt new construction from the rent control mandate. What about moving forward past that, though, the projects that are already in the pipeline? What about after that? Your development's going to come to a standstill, right? And it's not going to be the way that you think it is now. The ballot language is silent on new construction, though advocates of the rent control initiative were clear that it would apply to new construction. Because it was a citizen-driven ballot initiative, there is doubt among some city leaders that they have the legal ability to amend it. You're stuck with what you got. You're just going to have to work your way through that. The opposition was concerned about this very detail. Now that it's passed, our understanding is the language stands. Kyle said that according to the chamber's reading of the ordinance, she doesn't think the city council can simply amend the policy to exempt new construction. So they're already just scrambling. They're just trying to figure out what to do. This will be a really interesting one. This is not the first time this has happened in a community. It's just a community this big, St. Paul, as a kind of response to what's going on. I think you're going to have this. This is going to be kind of that poster child for this era of rent control. We've had rent control in other areas in other cities. And, it exists in certain levels. We don't have any here in Seattle. People complain wildly. There's no affordable rent. Well, there is. It's just not where you want to live or where you want to commute to. So from that standard, all right, correct. However, everybody's got options. Not everybody can or should be able to live exactly where they want to live. If you want to do that, you're going to have to pay to play. That's just how real estate works. And then when you start monkeying with these processes, all right, then you're going to have to deal with the consequences. And that means you've got builders pulling back, and they're just going to have to figure out what works for them and what doesn't work for them. Because right now, you've thrown an enormous monkey wrench in their plans. And what a cluster. I wonder what the over-under was on this initiative going through. I don't know how many people lost on that one. I mean, I don't know how I would have bet. I haven't followed this closely enough because, to be honest, I was following that whole defund the police in Minneapolis instead because that got more press. Either which way, I'm going to follow up on this rent control deal. That's a good one. What ends up happening? Don't know. A lot of chaos. Yeah. Is it the chaos you think of when a real estate market just gets whacked, kind of like when we had the whole Great Recession thing? Not as bad as that. But if you're if you're looking for additional housing units to be put on the market in St. Paul anytime soon, probably wouldn't count on that. We'll circle back around. We'll find a way to get to this one way or the other. All right. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks so much for being part of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. I know we didn't do Seattle real estate today. We did St. Paul, but I think it was one that a lot of people talk about and they throw out, well, what about rent control? Well, there you go. Here's what happens with new construction projects in the pipeline. And brakes get tapped, right? Oh, we're going to put a hold. Reimagine, rethink. Do that whole drill. All right. Thanks again for being here. We'll catch up soon. Till then, stay safe. We'll talk again. Bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.